Hey, what's up, guys? I'm Norb.
And I'm Mike.
And we are The Watchmen.
The men who watch.
Because if it's on a screen, we're watching it, talking about it, and sharing our thoughts about it with you guys.
Today, we are going to review the Blues Brothers movie from 1980. But before we get into that, we are making Watchmen history, Norb. And because we're making history, I wore my Goonies t-shirt, which was the t-shirt I wore the very first show we made. Why, Norb, are we making history?
Well, because for the first time ever, we are joined by a very special guest to do a review of this show. So before we bring that special guest on, I do want to thank all of you guys real quick for being here, listening to us on our podcast. For those of you who are listening on podcasts, thank you so much for listening to our show. We appreciate it. And for those of you who are watching us on YouTube, please continue to do so. Hit that like button and hit that notification bell and subscribe because we appreciate your support. So, Mike, before we get into the review, let's introduce this very special guest.
So I am very proud to introduce our special guest on the screen right here behind me. His name is Michael Howie, also known as the Fourth Wall, coming to you from Chicago, Illinois. Michael, welcome to our show.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I'm looking forward to it. I love talking about movies, so this is
How does
a good
it
time.
feel to be the very first guest on The Watchmen in history?
Yeah, it's a big honor. I'm looking forward to it. So thank you for having me.
So, Michael, I got to ask you, how many shows of The Watchmen have you actually listened to?
I've watched a lot of them, actually. I watched the superhero movies. I've watched the top 5 action movies, and I've also been watching a lot of the gaming ones from the 80s. So I'm liking the way it's being made, and it reminds me a lot of how I've been doing shows with my friends on the radio for my high school, where we review movies as well. So it's pretty similar. So I enjoy it.
Yeah, tell us a little bit about your show.
So my show, as you mentioned, is called The Fourth Wall. And I've done it with 2 of my friends for the last 4 years. The first 3 years we did it as a radio show, which aired every week on Saturday mornings on our school's radio station. And we go to movies and we talk about them, review them. We talk about what we've been watching. We watch things on Netflix. We go to the theater. We have deep intellectual discussions and also just do short little reviews of the top 5 movies in the box office. And then this past school year, we did a podcast to make our time a little bit more flexible. So we did it as a podcast this past year, and it's been a lot of fun and something I'd like to continue doing in college, or maybe a different format. But it's been a lot of fun. Big highlight of my year in high school.
And tell me why you love movies so much.
Well, I like all forms of storytelling. I've always loved to read, and movies are one of the best ways, I think, to tell a story, because there's so much more than just the plot and just what's happening. I think that directors get a lot more freedom than authors, because there's different ways of showing symbolism besides the plot and things people say. There's camera work, and a lot of it is just beautiful to watch, where you see different motions and different, I don't know how to describe it, but the way that the camera moves is so important in film, and you can't really get that in a book. And so that's why I think why I love movies, because there's just so much creativity beyond the plot.
Very well said. So, where are you off to college this fall?
I'll be at the University of Missouri, and I'll be studying journalism and possibly picking up a minor in political science. But journalism is my major, so I'm very excited, very, very excited to be there.
Well, yeah. Mike was talking about the shirt he was wearing. So I'm wearing a shirt that I haven't worn on the show yet. It's actually my University of Washington Huskies shirt. And you mentioned your major because I myself too was a broadcast journalism major and actually double majored in political science. So It's funny that you mentioned those two things because That's what I studied. So it's kind of cool that we're now collaborating here. 2 generations, talking about movies from the 80s coming up here. So this is pretty cool having you on, and it's awesome to be talking about a movie that is just so many years before you were born, and yet here we are breaking it down, talking about it. So
what's funny, Norb? I've never considered you a political person. The fact that you double majored in poli-sci, you're usually pretty well at being neutral on a lot of things.
Well, and I'll be honest with you, it's not like I really have a love for politics. I'm not even really that much into journalism as much as I was just into filmmaking. But as a student at the UW, my options were limited because I wasn't going to USC to study film. So I transitioned from engineering to journalism, and I just love doing broadcasting and any kind of stories. But it wasn't necessary for the politics or that whole aspect of things. Obviously, I did not pursue that route in my chosen career, but it gave me a lot of things to build off of during my years at the UW. So that's it's very different from the way my career turned out. But that's kind of how things go, right?
Yeah. Well, I'm kind of thinking about trying to combine the two, doing something in Washington or with politics. Being a reporter or a journalist, a writer for a newspaper. But my options are still very much open. I have not even decided what field of journalism I want to go into. So I'm kind of going into things, just trying to weigh my options and see what I like best, which I think is good.
So, Michael, what are you watching right now besides this movie we're going to talk about? What else have you been watching?
So I've been watching both movies and shows lately. I just got out of school last week, so my summer has begun. So I've got a lot more time on my hands, which has allowed for a lot more movie watching and also show watching. So I just started watching House of Cards on Netflix. A show I very much recommend, especially because it's got journalism and it's got politics, which are things I'm interested in. But it's a very well-made show with Kevin Spacey, kind of following some of the behind-the-scenes things that happen in Washington. It's very, very unrealistic, not something that right now is happening to that extent, at least. But we
love that show, by the way. We haven't talked about it, Mike, on our show yet, but I know personally between you and I, we're big fans of Kevin Spacey, and it was a huge. We were really into that show, and it was sad when the final season kind of came to an abrupt halt because of what happened with all the scandals related to Kevin Spacey, and unfortunately, that series had to go finish without him, and it was. It's just not the same like Kevin Spacey, but they tried. I did watch it, but I love that show, especially when Kevin Spacey was in it. So I agree with you. We might have to do a show just talking about that because that's a great entertainment.
It's a great show. Yeah,
sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
And I do love the way that they break the fourth wall a lot, which is what my show is called, because we are kind of breaking the fourth wall by talking about movies that we've seen. So Kevin Spacey, I think, does such a great job with even just the slightest little looks at the camera without even having to say anything. He communicates so much, and I think that's a really powerful element to film and to TV. So that's one of my favorite things about that show. I've also been watching a lot of movies. I saw Birdman very recently, which is it won Best Picture in 2014. Very, very well done movie, and I enjoyed it a lot. Kind of a strange one too.
Good movie. Definitely, they tried to make it one shot. The whole movie was one shot.
I also I saw The Social Network, which is about Mark Zuckerberg and the creation of Facebook. Well done movie. I saw. I'm blanking on it now. I wrote it down, and I don't know where my notes are. But it was about a family in Pennsylvania, in Philadelphia, actually, and they it's starring. We can cut this. I don't know where my notes are.
Is this a streaming show?
No, it's
a movie.
It's a movie. It's got Playbook in it.
Oh, Silver Linings
Playbook, yes.
Oh, okay. Okay.
So I've been watching Silver Linings Playbook, which is I loved. It was kind of a new genre that I hadn't really watched a whole lot, but I really liked that.
Mike, have you seen that? I haven't seen it yet. Have you seen it?
I haven't. No.
Yeah, I need to check that out. I know it's been well received, and it's just one of those movies that slipped by, and I never got to catch up to it. So, with your endorsement, I have to check that out now. So it's been on my list to see.
I also I've watched this movie probably 10 times, and it just gets better every time I watch it. And it also has been featured in one of the shows that you guys talked about on Netflix called The Movies That Made Us, and that movie is Die Hard. I watched that about I think last week, and it's still one of my favorites. Just such a action-packed movie that never really has a down point from the beginning to the end. So it's
nice to hear you say that.
Yeah. So you watched that 10 times, or you mean you watched Silver Linings Playbook 10 times?
Die Hard I watched 10 times.
Okay, all right. Right on. We got Die Hard lovers right here.
You can quote samples with us. That's great.
Yeah. So those are just some that I've been watching, but I've got a pretty long list on Netflix of what I want to pick up next.
Nice.
Yeah, well, wow, Die Hard 10 times. I am super impressed. I have to ask you then, what's your favorite part of Die Hard at this point? Now that you've seen this, what's the part when you get to that, you're like, yeah, this is the part I never get tired of?
I love when Bruce Willis is on the radio, just whenever he's on the radio, either when he's talking to the police down on the ground or to the terrorists in the building. It's just such he has so much presence throughout the film, but especially on the radio when he's talking to the terrorists, just their disbelief and shock at what he's doing and how he's just kind of toying with them, and not he's giving himself away, but not too much to where they know exactly where he is, and he's kind of toying with their minds, and it's just kind of a crazy way to do it, but it's so bold, and I love that.
You're probably one of the few people, Michael, that occasionally on a show I may, if Norb and I are talking about something where I might talk like I'm mocking that I'm an expert on something, and I may subtly say, as in Helsinki, Sweden. I think you probably get that one.
Yeah.
So many good quotes.
Michael, you have your notes with you, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so we're good. So let's see. Oh, another thing I wanted to ask you, Michael, is what I think is so cool about your upbringing is the fact that you have grown up in Chicago. And when it comes to movies, it's always fun to see your hometown in a film. And obviously Seattle, it's always a Space Needle shot that gets top billing. So whenever a movie takes place in Seattle, they'll show the Space Needle, maybe a city shot, and then the rest is filmed in Vancouver, Canada.
Yeah.
But when a movie's done in Chicago, it's done in Chicago. And not to mention the home of John Hughes, all the Ferris Bueller movies and all the other ones he made. But I mentioned this earlier, but you attended the high school that John Hughes shot all his famous movies.
Yeah, pretty much.
How does that make you feel that you walked amongst greatness?
Yeah, it's really cool. The campus that I was at freshman year was where they filmed a lot of Home Alone, and they did some of the outdoor filming in a downtown area that's in my school district that I drive through all the time. So it's cool to see it, and it really doesn't look a whole lot different. And he also did some that were nearby at nearby high schools. The shot in Ferris Bueller's Day Off where Ferris picks up his girlfriend outside, where the nurse brings her outside. That was filmed just 20 minutes north of here, and they actually redid that area, but for some time it looked exactly the same. They did nothing to that shot to make it look like it was filmed in a studio, to make it in a studio or anything like that. So it's cool that he's used a lot of the space. And I'm not in the city. I'm 20 minutes north, but he still goes out there to do the shots, and it's right in my backyard. It's pretty cool.
So, Michael, I was wondering, so you're obviously a film buff, so you probably know a lot more of the history of these 80s movies that were shot there and the history of the high school. When you went there, did everybody kind of know that this was a famous filming location, or is that sort of more like only the film nerds know this history and people just think this is a regular old school? I'm just curious if that's a legend that's well known amongst your peers.
It's actually not at all. And I honestly didn't know about it until a couple years ago. When I was actually on that campus freshman year, I did not know about it for all of freshman year. So wow. It's interesting. I think the movies that made us talked about it a lot, and they filmed the exterior of the school, and so that was really cool to see. But I think a lot of people, I didn't know anyone who knew about that. I knew that Ferris Bueller's Day Off and Home Alone were obviously filmed around here. The house that's shot from the exterior is in my school district. It's like 15 minutes from my house. But I had no idea that they had filmed it inside the school until just a couple of years ago.
Wow.
Yeah.
Of course, we didn't really know that much about it till I saw that documentary too. So yeah, there was this little unknown secret. Only
and then the one about Home Alone as well. All the Home Alone, they built the Home Alone house in the high school's gym.
Yep.
Yeah, and then even had it over the pool at one point for one of the final shots in there.
Yeah.
So
the water. And I've swam in that pool, and I've played basketball in that gym. So it was cool to see that.
Oh, that's pretty wild.
So another great movie filmed in Chicago was Christopher Nolan's The Dark Knight. Mm-hmm. And just an update on the argument that Norb and I had about which movie deserves a higher ranking, Christopher Nolan's The Dark Knight or Tim Burton's original Batman. The few people I polled, Norb, are all taking your side. And I polled Michael yesterday, and even Michael is taking your side and agreeing that The Dark Knight deserves higher credit, although he does admit he's never seen Tim Burton's Batman before.
Yes. I can't fully speak to that. However, The Dark Knight is one of my favorite movies of all time. It's in my top 5, maybe even top 3. So it would be very difficult for any movie to top it. So I have to go with The Dark Knight.
Even without having seen the aforementioned 1989 Batman with Michael Keaton, you're pretty certain that no matter how good that movie may be, it's not going to take the place of where The Dark Knight stands.
Right.
Yeah. Sorry, Mike. Looks like I win.
Well, we're not done.
I'm sure you'll find
it was over. I just said
winning.
So far.
You just said I'm winning. So far, everybody you've talked to so far has taken my side. So I'll take the win at this point.
Yes, the three people I've talked to so far have all taken your side.
I think you're missing my friend Kurt. He also takes my side. So if you didn't add him, put one more.
No, it's Kurt, Rob, and Michael. They've all taken your side. That's 3 people. So you're doing really well.
Okay, so we've got an audience of 4, 3, I guess. Okay, well, hey, I'll take 3-0. Hey, that's enough to win, get you close to winning the World Series if you can go 3-0. So I'm good with that.
Although you better not get to 3-1 because the Cubs came back from that.
They did. That's true.
So.
And we are talking about Chicago-based movies today. So and then we want to get into curses and things like that. So I'll just be happy with my win streak. But back to the matter at hand.
Well, I think this is a good time to get into our movie review. And I suggested The Blues Brothers from 1980 as one for us to watch for a number of reasons. One, Michael is from Chicago, and this movie was filmed in Chicago. But 2, Norb has never seen this movie, which blew my mind. So we'll get into more of that in a minute. But Michael, I toss to you to introduce us to what the Blues Brothers movie is all about.
After his release from prison, Jake reunites with his brother, Elwood, collectively known as the Blues Brothers. Jake's first task is to save the orphanage the brothers grew up in from closing by raising $5,000 to pay back taxes. The two are convinced they can earn the money by getting their old band back together. However, after playing several gigs and making a few enemies, including the police, the brothers face daunting odds to deliver the money on time. And this movie is starring John Belushi and Dan Aykroyd as the two blues brothers who are released from prison and are the main forces trying to get the $5,000. So it's got a ton of famous people in it as well that I'm sure we'll get to at some point. But it's just kind of littered with stars all over.
Well, I think one of you needs to go first with your opinions on this movie. So I'm going to go last since I'm the one that's seen it a lot of times.
Well, I'll start since you brought up the fact that I'm the only one in this group who hadn't seen it up until just a couple days ago. Even Michael had seen it. And so I guess I'll try to explain why I haven't seen it because, like you said, you're surprised. Every once in a while, there's a movie you never saw, like E.T., and I'm thinking, how did you not see that movie? And you're wondering, how did I not see the Blues Brothers? Especially when I have a friend, Rob, who was all about the Blues Brothers. Well, first of all, I was one of those kids who, Rob and other friends of mine would always talk about Saturday Night Live. And I always felt like I was never part of that conversation because I wasn't allowed to stay up that late. I didn't get to watch Saturday Night Live. And I know the whole origin of this story came from the Saturday Night Live sketches that they did, multiple ones before it finally became a movie. So I didn't see Animal House back then. So I didn't know who John Belushi was. I didn't know Saturday Night Live. So all these references were not things that when I heard about the Blues Brothers, I didn't know what it was. I kind of recognized the two guys in suits and fedoras and black sunglasses, but there was no YouTube, to know what was going on with that. So I had no draw to see it because I felt so far from it. So I guess I would start just by saying, from that aspect, that is why I missed out and it never quite connected with me. But
so let me ask you a quick question though, Norb.
Yeah.
A quick question is, the Blues Brothers, if you remember Showtime back in the 80s, Showtime was like HBO. It was one of the first pay-per-view things you could set up in your home to have real movies you could watch. And Blues Brothers was one of those movies that was on Showtime all the time, which is another surprise as to why I can't believe you never just caught it on Showtime. And I don't know if your parents had Showtime, but did any of your... Did anyone have Showtime?
We did. We had HBO early on in elementary school, but when this came out, we didn't have cable. So the only things I ever watched were, if it wasn't on regular TV, was either a video rental or something that, one of my friends rented and had, and it just never came up. Again, as I said, it should have. I'm surprised it never did because usually Rob would show me all these other movies that I missed, that I would catch, like Vacation and other Chevy Chase movies, but this just never happened. So, I can't explain it other than the fact that I wasn't drawn to it because I didn't have any connection. It wasn't like, oh, I want to see Aykroyd and Belushi. Those guys are hilarious. I hadn't seen anything, so there wasn't any draw for me to want to go see it, even if it did kind of pop up for the opportunity. So, but yeah, I'll stop there. And I'll let Michael talk a little bit about it, and then I'll give you my reaction, in the next part of my analysis. But I want to hear what Michael thinks of this movie, being that he's the farthest away, generationally speaking, of the three of us here.
Yeah.
And spoil away, Michael.
Right.
Older movies, we have a rule, we can talk spoilers, so.
All right. Well, yeah, this is a movie that I had seen maybe 4 or 5 years ago, maybe even longer than that. So I was much younger then, as funny as that may sound to you, where 4 years may not seem like a whole lot, but I was a lot younger, and so I barely remembered any of it. I remembered what they looked like, what the Blues Brothers looked like, and I remembered the most famous line, and that was about it. So watching it again was...
We're on a mission from God.
Well, yeah, that one too. But I really enjoyed watching it a second time because it felt kind of like watching it a first time, honestly. And one of my favorite parts about this movie is how absurd it is. And I think that that's kind of an important part to a lot of movies. And without absurdity, this movie wouldn't have anything because they would have gotten caught by the police and the army a long, long time ago. But just how crazy and ridiculous what they're doing is. I mean, just the idea that they're going to try to get a band back together to play a gig to make $5,000 to pay a nun for their taxes because they feel that they've sinned and they want to repent for their sins. It's just such a ridiculous plot, but it's amazing how that is able to turn into such a classic movie with so many quotable lines and so many iconic scenes. And like the part where they're in the church at the beginning, and it's a Baptist church, and there's that the song that they're singing, and I can't remember.
James Brown.
Yeah, James Brown
is singing it. Yep.
Yeah, and
do you see the light?
it's just so ridiculous. I can't remember which Blues Brother it is that is just seen in this light just blasting through the window, and that's just kind of what kicks off their mission.
It's Jake.
Is it Jake?
Is the one.
Yeah, John Belushi. Yeah.
And it's just so crazy. It's just ridiculous, and there's so much of that.
So I have a question on levels of absurdity. Where Elwood lives in Chicago, where the trains are going by every second, is it really like that?
Well, I think they're kind of making a commentary on that by making it just way more than it really is. But the L system is it's basically like the subway of New York, and I take it to Cubs games actually, and there are apartments that are right by it, and they're pretty loud, and they're like a subway system. It goes by every 10 minutes or 5 minutes, you'll get a subway, but it's not every other second where one goes away and all of a sudden there's one right after it. And so I think they're kind of satirizing that a little bit, but that is another point of absurdity where they're just making a joke about how frequently the subway system goes by in Chicago. So yeah.
So I'm hold on. I'm dying to ask this question. Simple question. Yeah. Dying to ask this question, Michael. Whenever you apply for something, have you ever been tempted to put your address as 1060 West Addison?
No, I haven't. But it's a good idea. It's like putting like the White House, I think, is like a common one as a joke that you put as your address. But putting the address of Wrigley Field is just another point of making the Chicago reference, but also just being funny.
So in the movie, when he held up his driver's license, he says, "No, I put 1060 West Addison." Did you know that was Wrigley Field before he said it was Wrigley Field?
I did not. I know that Wrigley Field is on Addison, Waveland, and Sheffield. Those are the streets because they talk about it all the time when someone hits one out onto Waveland or onto Sheffield. And then Addison's just the probably one of the most well-known streets in Chicago. But I did not know the address actually, so I did not remember that was a point in the movie where Wrigley Field is brought up.
Because I know you're a diehard Cubs fan, and now as a Cubs fan, you know a little bit more about your team. You know the address where they play.
Yeah, if I get that question on Jeopardy, I'll be set.
You are.
Yeah.
So I got to follow up with, having said that I had no connection to this movie, I have actually done pretty well with still remaining with having no idea what this movie was about. So when I sat to watch it, I had no idea what I was in store for, other than the image of these guys. And I was blown away that I feel somewhat sad that I didn't get to see this back in the day when it came out, because this movie was so, like you said, it was so absurd, but there's some things in here that just are unbelievable. Some stunts, the action in it is incredible. The cameos by so many different famous musicians. I had no idea this was even a musical in that regard. I've seen those guys dancing on just numerous sketches, but I didn't realize this was actually sort of a musical show in itself. So there's a certain part of me that wishes I had, because I think there's a big part of when a movie comes out at the time that it does, where you are and what point you are in your life when you watch it has a big effect on how you receive it. We talk about that all the time, that sometimes if you watch a movie after the fact, it's hard to go back and enjoy it for what it was at the time, i.e. Star Wars, or the first time you saw, something like in my case, Braveheart or Raiders of the Lost Ark. That first time is so powerful. But this one, as much as I was sad that I didn't have that connection early on, it was a surprising wow, where's this been all my life? Because it was such a fun ride. I couldn't believe what I was watching. And every turn when a new cameo or a new sequence played out, I was having such a blast. I was thinking, how did I not know so much about this film? I felt like I had been an ostrich with my head stuck into the ground. But at the same time, it made my viewing of this that much more fun because it just had so many great unexpected moments in it. So I'm glad it took me a few decades to finally get around to it, but such a fun, absurd, crazy, fun
great
movie.
unexpected moments. Just to comment on what you're saying, I'm going to talk specifics now and then when I listen to you cover something. So my favorite part of this movie, and I have watched it so many times, is the mall scene.
I was going to say that one too.
They destroy that mall with a car. I have never seen a movie with more glass destruction and just over the top, just destroying. I mean, when can you say, oh yeah, the car chase down the mall?
It's funny.
I never get tired of watching
same
that.
reaction too.
It's funny because
I was watching it.
when you mentioned you've never seen a movie with so much glass, instantly when I saw that, I thought of only one movie that may have had a similar amount of glass destruction. And that movie is Die Hard.
Shoot the glass.
Yeah.
Yep.
Very good point.
Right.
I guess I think of the glass in the mall. Yeah, and I guess what I should say is they're destroying the mall, but there's so much glass that's a part of that destruction that I think adds to the just that sound we all hear. The sound of breaking glass is such a, when you hear it, it's like, oh, something broke. And
it was even watching it now so many decades later and having seen so many action movies, I watched that and I was still blown away going, how did they do this? How much money did they spend? They were crashing through all kinds of stuff. They trashed a drum set and a bongo set at one point and so many things that my mind just kept thinking, how expensive was this movie to make? Because you just don't have action sequences in a mall like that. At least I can't think of any that measure up to that. That was something else. I felt the same way. It's like, that was a one-of-a-kind action sequence to destroy an entire mall. It looked like they destroyed an entire mall, just like that. So that was one of the many great moments, like you said.
So the mall location, I had made a note of this. It was filmed at the Dixie Square Mall in Harvey, Illinois. Michael, do you know where Harvey, Illinois is?
I have no idea.
So the Dixie Square Mall was a mall that had closed up. It was abandoned. It had been abandoned for a year, and so they went in and they rebuilt all the shops, and they had companies come in and help, supply the toys for the toy store and all the things that you saw destroyed. And in the parking lot, when they're racing through the parking lot outside the mall, they populated the parking lot. All those cars were from nearby dealerships. So they made a deal with the auto dealerships to fill the parking lot with new cars from the dealership. And so the production manager was telling the stunt driver, don't hit any of those cars when you're driving around outside. And the other story that John Landis talked about is that they hired the most reputable security company in the business to guard the mall at night because they had all these expensive things there, because the rule was whatever didn't get destroyed was going to go back to whoever supplied it. And they started having things stolen. And as it turned out, the security guards from the company were stealing stuff. So they had to hire another security outfit to watch the security outfit.
Wow.
Wow, that's crazy.
But my friend and I, back in the 80s, we would, talk about movie samples over and over. Out of the blue, one of us would say, is there anything else you need? And I'd say, yes, do you have a Miss Piggy? Because that's the line that leads into the entire destruction scene of the mall. And the guy who says, yes, do you have a Miss Piggy? He's one of the stunt guys in the movie. So, but my favorite part of the movie, I can watch that over and over and I never get tired of watching it.
Well, I guess on the topic of stunts, that blew my mind, but it didn't stop there. Wait, there's more. The car chase at the end, where they got the entire Chicago Police Department and everybody chasing after those guys as they run through town. So many vehicles crashing and cop cars flipping, doing the A-Team thing where you got the ramp, making the cars flip over and crash into each other. But it just kept going on and on and on. And again, my brain kept going, how much did they spend making this? Well, I guess I read up that this was one of those movies at the time. It had the record for the most numbers of cars destroyed in a film. So now I'm not surprised that set the record, because it really was a hard to fathom number of vehicles that they trashed in this show. And that, again, was one of the things where I was watching it, getting flashbacks to the French Connection. I'm getting French Connection vibes in this Blues Brothers comedy movie, and yet the action is really, really just so intense and over the top. And just the sheer quantity of vehicles destroyed was so
when I watched
mesmerizing.
I watched it with my son Brett, who's 13, and I said, you got to watch this with me because you need to see this movie. And I lost track of how many times he would just go, "Jeez!" every time a car would hit something or there was the pile up. I mean, over and over, "Jeez!" And that in itself is a testament to why this movie has stood the test of time and is still impressive today when it comes to the action.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So the place that you mentioned that the army was, when the armies and everyone is chasing them all, they're going to Daly Plaza, which is where the building is that they need to get to give the money to the Cook County tax clerk or something like that. And that place, it's called Daly Plaza. It's named after one of the former mayors of Chicago, Richard Daley, and he is a very well-known mayor. Very famous in Chicago. And
now, is it
outside.
Richard J. Daley or Richard M?
Richard M. Daley. Richard J. Daley, I believe, is his son, who is also mayor after him. So a little interesting fact there. But anyway, that place is right in the middle of downtown, and my parents work minutes from there. It's a minute's walk. My mom actually goes there all the time to court to argue cases. So I've been in that plaza. There's around Christmas time. There's a Kris Kringle market for German, all sorts of German relics and food, and it's a lot of fun. And they do a Oktoberfest there too, and just all sorts of things. The Picasso that's there is a very famous Picasso. They actually mention that in the movie when they're talking about where they have to go. I think one of the Blues Brothers says, "Oh, that's where the Picasso is, right?" And it's a very famous painting or sculpture by Picasso. So it's kind of interesting that the places that I see all the time when I go downtown are just in the movie, and they shot it there, and all those things really happen right there. So it's kind of cool.
Yeah, they really did drive the car through the lobby at Daly Plaza, right? I think they read about that. Some of the interiors were sets, but they actually did drive it through the actual location, which a lot of times these days they just fake all that, but that was really legit. And so many times you're watching going, are they really doing this? I think they really did crash this thing. And sure enough, they really did drive this car through the glass, more glass shattering at Daly Plaza. So it's pretty amazing.
So along the lines of Richard J. Daley, Michael, I wanted to ask you that Mayor Jane Byrne, at the time that this movie was made, was the mayor that gave permission to John Landis and his crew to film in Chicago. And before that, Richard J. Daley would not allow movies to be filmed in Chicago. And it was all due to a movie that had been made before where it depicted a policeman in Chicago accepting a bribe. And that really angered Richard Daley. And he said, no more movies are going to be filmed in my town because I don't like how my town is being portrayed. So it was a big deal that Jane Byrne allowed filming, and that opened up Chicago for other movies to be made for years to come because of the Blues Brothers. Did you know that? I
did not know that. The only thing I know about Jane Byrne is that there's a memorial highway for her. But that's all I know about her. But that's cool. Yeah, that's interesting that the mayors can kind of dictate the films that are made. You never really think about that, how the city has to give the permission for the movie to be made. If you want to do a movie in Chicago, you can't just show up one day and start filming. You've got to get the approval of a lot of people.
Norb, you were talking about the action cars, and you know that shot of their car that goes down, I think it's Whacker Drive, where it's like going 100 miles an hour and it's a panning shot? That John Landis said that he thought people wouldn't believe he was really going 100 miles an hour, so he put pedestrians around there. I don't know how that made a difference, but he said the stuntman really did go 100 miles an hour down Whacker Drive.
Wow.
It looked fast, so I never questioned
it didn't look sped up.
Yeah, when it came to the driving action, with the exception of a couple of hokey, over-the-top, stunt sequences, most of all that stuff was pretty much like Brett said. Jeez, just from one to the next.
It's interesting.
Go back real quick before we move on from Daily Plaza. You mentioned about the tax assessor. I actually had to double take because I didn't catch it right away that it was Steven Spielberg who was making a cameo as the tax assessor or tax collector or whatever he was. But yeah, I was like, whoa, Steven Spielberg's in this thing.
That was one of the little surprises, Norb, when I was telling you got to see this. I thought, I wonder if you'll recognize Steven Spielberg. It sounds like you did.
I didn't right away, but then I did after. It was like, this guy looks familiar. Wait a second, because there's young Steven Spielberg, obviously. He just started getting his career going. So he was still in that young, fresh, off of Jaws mode. And it was pretty surprising, but not that surprising given that there were so many cameos throughout this whole film. Every turn, it was like, oh, such and such is in this. Oh, this singer's in this. So again, surprises around every corner that made it fun. I got to bring up, speaking of cameos, we were talking so much about Die Hard. The tiny littlest cameo, even remember in the music store where they're trying to get the instruments, and then Ray Charles is there, and he sees that this kid's going in there to steal a guitar, and he blind, of course, he grabs his gun and fires a warning shot and scares the kid off. You recognize that kid, right?
I didn't.
No.
It's Argyle, the limo driver from Die Hard.
Oh my God!
I didn't check it, so I could be wrong, but he looks, if he's not him, it's a spitting image. It's a young version of Argyle.
Wow.
So check it to make sure I could be wrong, but when I just looked, I didn't even have to look it up. I looked at his face, it's Argyle! Oh my gosh, he's in this show. That was pretty awesome.
Yeah, I had no idea.
One.
That's interesting.
That was probably my favorite cameo, just because it was the most completely unexpected and probably less noticeable one.
Yeah, well, you're not thinking about the cameos when you see Ray Charles making his own cameo. It's kind of like it's a cameo within a cameo.
You're just getting over the fact that he's in there. Yeah.
Well, you mentioned Whacker Drive. There's a lower and an upper Whacker Drive, and the scene that I think you're talking about is on lower, which is under under something. I can't remember what it is, but I've actually run 5Ks under that, just on that road. On Mother's Day, we used to do a 5K with my whole extended family. They all live relatively close to me, and so again, just those things where you see things in movies and you've been there and you've driven and even run on the road that they film it on is a really cool thing to see. So I love those. They
clearly did not film this movie in Vancouver, Canada.
Yeah, that's for sure.
Oh well, if you guys are going to be silent, I've got way more to say here.
There's plenty more. I was just, man, you haven't said, well, Mike, why don't you jump in with a little something in here? There's plenty more where that came from.
Well, when you talk about absurdity, Michael, like you did, I was thinking about the movie this morning, preparing for the show, just running the movie in my brain. And absurdity, a small example of that is the fact that they have no money, and yet all of a sudden they come up with this huge megaphone to put on top of their car and drive around to advertise.
Yeah.
Where did that come from? And that's where you really have to turn your brain off a little bit and just accept that this is just a fun movie and don't think too much about the logistics. So that was another example of absurdity. Another question I have, and I don't think any of us are big country music people, but I remember when they got to Bob's Country Bunker and they go in there, and the first thing out of Brett's mouth is, what's that wire? Why is that wire in front of the stage? And I just said, you'll see. And and then when they're playing, the bottles constantly being thrown. And I've often thought, were there really places like that? Or is that just another thing of absurdity?
Well, I think in that scene, I was realizing that when it shows, for some time you see the audience throwing the bottles and they're breaking, but then it goes between showing the audience and showing the band behind the screen. And when it shows the audience, they're not throwing any bottles, and they're enjoying the music after they switch the song. But then it cuts to the shot where you can see the screen, and then you can see the band behind, and the bottles are still hitting the fence, the metal thing. And I think that's just another joke on how people like throw bottles, and like at theaters they'll throw apples or whatever. And I think it's kind of again satirizing that thing that's just kind of a stereotype of bad bands get things thrown at them.
I played in a band for a number of years, as you know, Mike, and I've never been to a place that had chicken wire, so I can't say for myself I've ever seen it. I've definitely been in holes in the wall places where we wondered, what the heck are we doing here, playing for people who sometimes really didn't seem that interested in the kind of music we were playing, or just felt like we just couldn't wait for the night to be over. Luckily, no one ever threw any bottles at us. But I did have one drunk guy yelling at us because we weren't playing his style of music. And,
so did you play Rawhide?
I don't think that was the kind of music he wanted. It was actually at a Filipino function. They wanted more ballroom dancing, and we were kept playing all this R&B stuff, and made me almost want to quit playing live music. I was so mad after that night, but I continued to do it anyway. But yeah, I've never seen another place that had chicken wire. But I've seen other shows and videos where they've shown chicken wire protecting the band. So my guess is that it probably is a real thing in some places, but probably not around here. Maybe not anymore these days, but it probably was a thing, back in the 70s and 80s.
So Norb, being a musician, I assume you agree with their decision to have real musicians and try to get them to act versus actors to play musicians?
Well, I read a part in there. Yes, to answer your question, yes. Obviously now, because you recognize who these people are, Aretha Franklin, James Brown, Ray Charles, just to name a few, Cab Calloway. But I read somewhere at the time, they were thinking about not going with those more legendary people because they were sort of older and hadn't had any recent hits. So they were thinking about going with more newer names that would, now in contrast, looking back, I think that would have been a big mistake, because those names that were now considered sort of old and not anything recent have become legend names now, which maybe they weren't quite legend status then because they were still sort of in that mode of, still trending on what's hot then. But now looking back, these are names that have stood the test of time and add a certain weight to it, to where it makes the in my mind, the Blues Brothers movie got raised up, because oh my gosh, how did they get all these stars in here? These guys are legends, and a lot of them aren't alive anymore. So, it's pretty cool to see them in this, basically with them in it, they're supporting this film. And I think the being in there just gives it that much more credibility. But it definitely made those musical moments in those scenes. If it had been somebody else who didn't have the name or the cachet, it just wouldn't have meant the same. I think.
Well, and I was actually referring to the band, that their band, the Blues Brothers band, the characters they go find in all the places like the restaurant, that they were real musicians.
Bringing the old band back together again,
yeah.
You mean?
But they were all real musicians, handpicked by Paul Schaefer.
Yeah. Yeah, and I didn't know all those, the horn players and things like that. I didn't know all of those names as much, but I love that whole idea that these guys just, even in the movie, didn't want to just get some guys off the street, that they needed to get the guys back together again. And it was the same way that Aykroyd looked at getting these. He was determined, even though there was some clash of opinion with, I think, the studio, he really wanted to have those specific musicians in the show. And I think sticking with that idea in the script as well as in production was a good move, because they really do add, something to where now, as you look back in music history, you realize how important these players are. And it's just cool that you got the real people playing those roles and not just, some other name that could have just been the parts. So I think it's an important part of it, because it's all about getting the band back together. I mean, that's really at the heart of all this, it's all about getting the band back together. And anytime there's a movie that talks about getting the band back together, you have to get those people and pull them out of whatever they're doing now, because in bands, that's what happens. You have fun for a while, everybody goes their separate ways. And so many movies have taken that theme where they have to go find someone, and whether it's for a heist, for, like getting the bank robbery crew back together. We've seen it so many times where they go out and they find them doing some other job, and come on, man, we're gonna do one more big score, And so they were one of the pioneers of that, but just from the actual literal getting the band back together. So I love that part. You just never knew who was gonna show up next.
Well, it's funny, going back to absurdity for a second, because we talk about how getting the band back together is like that's the goal, that's the whole point of the movie. But there's some obstacles that get in the way. And one of them is, for whatever reason, is Carrie Fisher, who is just kind of in the best places and also the worst places with all sorts of weapons and just random items she's got some vendetta against one of the Blues Brothers, and just kind of goes out of her way and is always in the places that they're going to be. And she has detonators and a machine gun in the sewer system, rocket launchers. Yeah. Just talk about absurd. Why she serves an interesting purpose, because she's not really necessary. It's like this kind of, there's a little bit of a thing in the sewer system where you kind of learn a little bit of the reason maybe why she's there, but then she just kind of gets tricked and they leave her, and that's that. And there's never really like an end, like an official end to her as a character, and she just kind of disappears. But she appears and disappears all the time and throughout the movie with all these crazy explosives. It's kind of interesting that they added that.
I was definitely shocked when she showed up, because again, I didn't know she was in there, and I think if I had known, even if I'd seen a trailer and had flashes of the people making cameos, it would have spoiled the fun for me. So I'm glad I went into it fresh. So when she showed up, I was like, oh my God, Princess Leia's in this. What the heck? And she makes her appearance by firing a few rocket launchers into the part of the hotel, the nasty hotel building they're about to check into, and funny little sound design thing. The sound effects sounded like Battlestar Galactica, by the way. It was like, what the heck? This is the wrong sound effect for this. But yeah, she was at the heart of a lot of the key destructive moments in the show, and they were all absurd. Mm-hmm. They were all extremely ridiculous. And the funniest part, to add to the absurdity, is the fact that when they react to it, they act like it's no big deal. Like, okay, let's go inside now. They don't even freak out or anything, and that's what's so great. They just brush off the dust and keep going.
When the rocket launcher, it hits the hotel, and they duck. They always seem to duck before she even fires it. Right time. But they just get up. Yeah, they brush themselves off, and I think I noticed. I don't know if this was a mistake that they made, but at first when they stand up, they're outside the building, and there's some bricks that are on them, and they brush them off, and then they seem to be relatively clean, and they go inside. And then the next shot, they're walking up the stairs, and there's that man who's sitting on the steps. And then there's just more debris that they continue to brush off. And I don't know if that's just kind of making it even more absurd, if that's just genuinely a mistake that they made, but it's just so ridiculous that they're just, they don't even seem to notice her at all and even care whatsoever. And like when the whole building blows up, there's just kind of silence, and you know that they're gonna appear, they're not dead, but they just get out of the rubble and walk away, and then the police somehow are alive too. And I noticed that the police officer is somehow still holding his pistol after falling all the way down. He's just still holding the thing he had multiple stories up.
Well, when they decided to make this movie, Dan Aykroyd couldn't find anyone to write a script, and Dan Aykroyd had never written a movie script before, so he decided to write one. So when he turned it into John Landis as because he knew it was long, he took a cover of a Yellow Pages phone book and wrapped it around the script and gave it to John Landis, because the script was 360 pages.
Wow.
And he wrote backstories on every character as to what that was. So probably there was a big backstory about Carrie Fisher's character and Jake and the relationship. But then what John Landis had to do is take that 360-page script and narrow it down to about 120 pages.
Right.
So that backstory probably got taken out, and what was kept was just the blow them up part.
Yeah.
Yep. Either way, it's still funny. And I think that just adds to the charm of it, the fact that it doesn't make any sense.
Mm-hmm.
And she does explain herself at the end in that climactic confrontation in the tunnel where she explains why she's doing this. But then, like you said, Michael, she just kind of gets tricked and shoved aside, and then they go about their business, and that's kind of the end of that. She fires a couple more shots at him, and then we never see from her again. So, yeah, her whole purpose being there really serves none other than to make you laugh at these ridiculous explosive moments. Probably the most ridiculous one being where she takes the flamethrower, blows up the propane tank next to the phone booth, which, if this actually happened, it would just disintegrate the whole thing in a big ball of fire. But no, the phone booth has to go straight up in the air, which is not even physically possible given the way the stunt was created. But somehow this thing shoots straight up in the air and then lands in the middle of the road.
They just get out, keep going.
And they survive. So the whole thing, talk about absurd. That's probably the most absurd of them all, because of the way that this propane tank blows up on the side, and yet it shoots straight up in the air. I don't know what physics this world has, but I like to see that.
Carrie Fisher's really she's really lost a lot of aim when you go from Star Wars to she's got Stormtrooper aim now. It's not Princess Leia aim anymore. I don't know what happened.
So this movie was made during a time when disco was everywhere. And so that was one reason John Landis talked about why they could get all these famous musicians. They actually got them pretty cheap, and they were all available because nobody was really into their music at the time. And even when John Landis approached Cab Calloway about doing that song Minnie the Moocher, Cab said, "Hey, that's great. I've got this new disco version of it I just did that's really popular. It's climbing the charts." And John Landis said, no, we want you to do the original one. And so when Cab came into the sound booth, he was kind of disappointed because he wanted to do his disco version. So he did a take where he did his first laydown of the vocals, and he came out and said to John, "What'd you think?" And John said, "I thought it wasn't very good. You sound like I'm getting half of you." And of course, this is Cab Calloway, and John said he got really pissed. And he says, "Well, you need to tell me how to do it then." So John said, "I want you to do it with the energy. That's the reason we've got you in this movie." And so he went back in, and John said he did a great performance, and he came out and he said, "Is that better?" And he was pissed off and left. Wow. So things between Cab and John didn't start out very good, but John said by the time they finished it and did the actual shooting, that Cab was very nice and had gotten past all that. But
I'm so glad they went that way, because nothing dates shows that came out of the 70s when they have the disco flair on top of it. I think of like little shows like Space 1999. It's this futuristic show that takes place at that time in the future. You know, the moon base, Alpha, and these spaceships flying around, and yet the theme has got that and nothing dates that and makes it not sci-fi than throwing this disco track over the top. And if this had been disco-y too, it would have been fine at the time, but then it would have quickly become more outdated. And now it's like you listen to it and it's just classic. It has a classic sound because it's the sound that these artists played. And it really has become more, more nostalgic and, more classic is just the best way, as opposed to disco, which went and disappeared entirely. So they made the right call there, and they could have easily gone the wrong way. And I'm so glad they did, because now it just, when you watch it now, it just feels like, okay, James Brown. That's James Brown that we know. That's Aretha Franklin that we know. And Cab Calloway sounds like Cab Calloway of what we've known all these years. So yeah, that was one of the best decisions they made. Thank goodness.
Did you know that, John talked about that there were two musicians that they hired for the big numbers that couldn't lip sync well. They couldn't they couldn't lip sync to their own performance. And one of them was Aretha Franklin, and the other one was James Brown.
I was going to say, I didn't know it, but I was going to say, I bet James Brown. I was going to say James Brown.
So the way they did it with James Brown is they actually gave him a microphone and used his real vocals from the filming and overdubbed them into the music, because James Brown said, I'd never do it the same way twice. There's just no way I could redo myself. Aretha Franklin did, it was her song, but she had a really hard time lip syncing to herself. And so that scene, I don't know if you noticed, there are a ton of cuts.
Yeah.
And they're constantly cutting around to make her lips work because she had a difficult time. And the other little funny information, when you talk about movie reviewers, there was a famous movie reviewer from the New York Times. Her name was Janet Moslin. She didn't like the movie, and she complained about that very scene because the saxophone player on the bar, you could only see his legs through all the cuts. He was cut off from the waist up. And she said that is distracting editing. And she was very negative about the movie, and especially that part, because she felt like, why would you show the saxophone player from the waist down on the bar? That's just not good framing. And even the saxophone player said later he was a little disappointed because he'd worked really hard on choreography just for that stuff, and all you see is his waist and legs. And of course, I didn't notice it. I bet you guys didn't notice it
either.
No.
It's one of those things that it's funny. I always find it funny how certain people can key in on a very thing, like a famous movie reviewer from the New York Times, but then everyone else is like, I saw him back there, but it's no big deal. It's just,
Yeah.
you're usually watching Aretha.
Yeah. Now, there's a lot to watch. So many different performers. Anytime you have musicians on a stage and dancers and things, you kind of clue in on certain ones, but sometimes you're just because you're curious what other people are doing. You'll just watch other people in the background just to see if they're really focusing. Are they in character? Are they stepping with everybody else? And sometimes you'll notice little things like that you're not supposed to notice, but sometimes they make mistakes. Sometimes they're solid. But I think of one from Braveheart, one of our favorite movies, I know, that we haven't talked about yet. There's a scene at the end of the first battle, and things are starting to slow down, and you see one of the British soldiers and one of the Scottish guys going at it. And clearly they're just rehearsing or practicing, because they kind of just love tap their swords together. And it's so obvious. And I'm sure nowadays, if it was the digital technology, they would probably fix that, because it's pretty bad. But just little things that if you look, it's probably inevitably in some group shot, you're going to find someone not quite doing the right thing, or looking at the camera, or do something off. And apparently the saxophone player's the way he was presented just didn't go well for that movie reviewer. But I didn't notice that.
So if you all had to have a favorite part, are you with me on the mall scene? Or what would you say is your favorite part?
I would say that the mall scene is definitely up there, and really any of the police chases. I just really liked the way that they were able to coordinate those stunts and make them look so real and yet so ridiculous. So any of those. And then also I liked the end scene where it's kind of like the race up the building to get into the office, and was a scene when the Blues Brothers go and they ask where the office is, and whoever's there and the bottom tells them, and then the police come later and they're asking if you've seen two guys in black suits, and it's just a really funny moment. It's the whole
military. They all stop and ask where they went.
Yeah, and they just realize that they've just let some guy who's very much wanted just walk into the building, and that whole scene where there shows the two locations where they're trying to get up to the building as fast as they can to do one is to get the money in, and the other is to catch them before they do anything. I like the way that scene is made, and the end where everyone has their guns drawn on the two of them in the office, and it ends there. So I liked that scene as well.
Oh, that one gun was really close to the lens, wasn't it?
Yeah.
I would probably say for me, the mall scene definitely was the first take my breath away, if I could say that usage of description in this film. just because I felt like I'd never seen anything like that before. And it was that, oh geez, every single next shot of how much destruction they had in there. That certainly was the first one. And then I think just that ending car chase with so many vehicles trashing and crashing one after another. Even in this day and age of Fast and the Furiouses and a million car action movies, that one still was enough to make me go, how did they do that?
Yeah.
And that blows me away that 40 years later, that a movie that old could still make me think that. Hats off to them pulling that off and making it to where you're still impressed. Even now, 40 years later, and making me wish I'd seen it then, because if I'm impressed now, I can only imagine how it would have been if I'd seen that movie when it came out at that time when I was just a little kid. So I wish I could have had that experience, but I'll take this one. I'll take this fresh experience at my age now and enjoy the reactions I had. Those two elements definitely were standout. Applaud the filmmakers for doing that. It was something else.
I was pretty excited when you told me you hadn't seen it, because I thought, oh my gosh, I know you're going to love this movie. It is a gem.
And it wasn't just that I hadn't seen it. I knew really nothing about it. Because a lot of movies you don't see, but you've seen enough little random clips and you kind of piece together what you missed.
Yeah.
But I really went into this blinders on, and I'm glad I did, because I don't think I would have enjoyed it as much if I knew about who was going to be in it and had seen clips on YouTube of all the chase sequences. I probably would have been like, oh, okay, now I understand how it all comes together. But no, I went in completely blank. And now for everybody who hadn't seen it and listened to our review, you won't be able to do that now because we just spoiled it for you.
Yeah, sorry.
Hopefully people will still get to enjoy watching this. And even if you do listen to our descriptions here, it's still something to actually know about, but then to actually see it, it's still pretty impressive. I got to mention, remember I was telling you about the cameo, about the Die Hard Argyle guy?
Mm-hmm.
Well,
it was him?
Just looked it up. I looked it up to confirm I was right. His name's Devereaux White. And it even says right here, his first bookings were 1980s The Blues Brothers, where he played the role of the youth who tries to steal a guitar from Ray Charles' music store. And of course later it says he played the part of him getting to do the reading with producer Joel Silver and actor Bruce Willis for 1988's Die Hard, became the limo driver. So
that's a really good catch, yes. Norb. Gold star for you.
Yeah, I thank you. I was quite proud of myself. I caught that. It's so small, yet such a pretty cool scene.
You caught a cameo that at that time wasn't a cameo.
It was not. It was a future cameo.
It's just a kid who they cast.
Yep. Pretty wild.
Well, I've gone through most of my list of interesting little tidbits. The only one I had left out, I guess, that it was just talked a lot about John Belushi and what he was like. He was a crazy guy. He was into cocaine, doing tons of drugs during the making of the movie. Very hard to control, very hard to rely on. At one point, they were shooting near a neighborhood and Belushi just disappeared and they couldn't find him. And he had wandered into a nearby neighborhood, went into someone's house and said, I know you know who I am. I'm John Belushi. I need some food. Can I have some food? And so the person gave him some food and he said, I need to lie on your couch. And he lied on their couch and went to sleep. And the filmmakers found him an hour later. Someone had said, hey, this guy says he's at his house. And so he just went and he was tired because they had some late nights, just ate, took a nap right in the middle of shooting.
Wow.
Well, there was, crazy other stuff. I read that Belushi would sometimes, when they're off of not shooting, he'd go to some local establishments and people would come up to him and just give him some coke because they just want to have the experience and the story to say, I did coke with John Belushi. And, that's how rampant it was back then. So they would just walk up to him, give him some and say, hey, go snort together so they could go tell their friends about it. But he had a major cocaine addiction problem. And I read, and I don't know if this is the reason why Carrie Fisher's in the movie, but Carrie Fisher was dating Dan Aykroyd at the time. And in fact, they even told her to try to encourage John to cut down on it because it was becoming such a problem. So, she played his they had the relationship in the movie, but it was really Dan Aykroyd and her who had the connection. I didn't know that until I read up on it. But it's interesting how crazy that must have been. I mean, he's a crazy guy on camera, But it sounds like he was even crazier when the cameras weren't rolling. And it's amazing that they were still able to get the movie done. But it's his craziness that makes this work. Because if you probably got a guy who was more straight and normal, and this film probably wouldn't be as good as it was. Even though that meant him probably shortening his life significantly, he was the perfect guy to play this role. And obviously him and Aykroyd formed this role together through the days of Saturday Night Live and then turned it into this film. But, it's just that whole thing you hear about actors who've got the one side, they're brilliant artists and performers, and on the flip side there's this tortured soul that is probably why they're so brilliant. They're so tortured and have this extreme flip side, and sometimes ends tragically like it did for him. But this was a pretty amazing piece of work in the film cinema history. I'm glad we had this show to make me watch it, because I don't know if I would have gotten around to it anytime soon. So it's great to be able to talk about it with you guys, because it was awesome. Yeah. It took me only 40 years to get around to it. Glad I finally did.
Yeah. It's a movie I forgot about that I loved it. And I actually have a question, because we watched the extended cut version, and I was wondering what elements of it were the extended cut. I have some ideas, specifically like with all the dance numbers. Some of them just to me seem to go on like way longer than they really needed to. And I don't know, do either of you know what parts of it are extended? I'm sure I could figure it out if I watched the one that was made to be seen, but I don't know if you guys know.
I don't know. Yeah, I don't know.
I saw the regular cut, so obviously we saw two different things.
No, you watched the extended cut.
What's that?
That was the extended
one you gave
cut.
me? That was extended?
Yeah.
Oh, that's right. We watched the same copy. That's right. Never mind. So I'm only, okay, then I didn't even think about that. So my first exposure was the extended version. It was long. I think it was like 2.5 hours.
Yeah, it was very long.
I'm imagining that the regular version was more like 2.
Yeah.
So yeah, I am curious what they did cut out, if there's anything significant. I could see them cutting some music scenes, because they were definitely long.
Yeah, well, like the one in the church, the one in the church was like a 5-minute song.
It was long. Yeah.
I think
maybe
you're
they
right.
cut that down.
Yeah,
that would be my guess.
Well, it's cool. I feel even more privileged, the fact that I got to see the extended version as opposed to the regular. I saw more stuff than most people probably actually did. So I got to see some extra stuff after waiting 40 years. So I saw it all. I got to say, there's one scene, we talked about the grand scenes that took our breath away. One little thing that just blew my mind on the simplistic nature of it, yet it looked really hard to do. And that was in the opening scene when they get out of prison, and John Belushi gets out of prison, and he goes to visit the nun. And she's hitting him and stuff, and then he's in the desk and falls down the stairs.
Yeah. Stunt man.
That was a really good stunt, because I'm thinking it's hard enough to fall down the stairs, but he fell down the stairs stuck inside one of those little elementary school desks and chair combos. I'm thinking, to fall down that thing and not break your neck, that was a really good stunt. So whoever that stunt performer, if you're still alive, kudos to you, man, for doing that stunt, because that looked hard. That looked painful.
Yeah, and the whole desk just shatters.
But to do it trapped inside that thing, it made it look like it'd be more dangerous than just falling down normal. So that was impressive on just a small note. So they had great big stuff, and they had really cool small stuff. Mm-hmm. Impressive.
Anything else, Michael, from your notes, or anything to add?
No, I think we covered it. Yeah, I think I don't have anything else I can think of to talk about.
Are you going to recommend this to your fellow Fourth Wall podcast friends?
I will. I'm pretty sure both of them have seen it, although it's possible that we saw it at the same time, so it's worth a rewatch anyway. But yeah, I told one of them I was watching it actually last night, so I'll tell them that they should watch it again.
Cool. Well, I do have a small surprise for the show. I couldn't find my saxophone. It's missing in the other room. I don't know where it went. So I couldn't come and play my saxophone and play some blues music. So I had to get creative. So along the lines of my favorite quote from the movie, which is definitely will is there anything else you need? Yes. Do you have a Miss Piggy where he holds up the Grover? And of course, Frank Oz, as you know, was at the beginning of the movie in the jail. So I have a little stuffed animal here. This is my little ghost from Ghostbusters. So in the spirit of that moment where he held up Grover, got a little Ghostbuster stuffed animal here to share. Because stuffed animals can be cool at no matter what age. And he even press him. There's a little bit of the song. So now, Nor, because it played this really low quality audio version of Ghostbusters, are the YouTube flags gonna tag that little bit of music?
Yep, we're demonetized now just because of that. Right. We're in big trouble.
Well, since we're not making any money,
I think it's short enough that it probably won't get caught. But I've been surprised before, but it's pretty short, so I think we'll skirt under the radar on this one.
All right.
I would have liked to have heard the saxophone, though. I really was hoping to hear that sax solo by you. I'm a little disappointed.
It would have been very Spandau Ballet like.
That would be good if you could pull off a Spandau Ballet. I thought it was going to be more like Caillou's marching band if you were playing it instead. Which is not a good thing, by the way. All
okay,
right.
Michael, it was a pleasure to have you on the show with us. Perhaps we can have you back.
Yeah,
another time.
That'd be great. Yeah, I had a lot of fun. I love talking about movies, so I think it's one thing to watch it, but being able to talk about it kind of opens your eyes to more things you might not have noticed. So I always enjoy it. So I'm happy to be back. If you would like me.
Perhaps think about a movie that either is very important to you that you think we possibly haven't seen, or if there's something you've got in mind that none of us have seen that you think would be a good one. We're always open to ideas.
Yeah, well, I was thinking about it, and there was a movie that I saw recently that I've seen a couple times, but forgot to mention in the beginning, and that is There Will Be Blood. I don't know if you guys have seen that with Daniel Day-Lewis.
Yeah,
a long time ago I saw it. Yep, when it came out.
Well, so we don't have to talk about that one, but that's one of my favorites, and I saw it recently, so it reminded me of that. But
isn't it about time for Daniel Day-Lewis to do another movie? Because he does a movie about every 8-10 years.
I guess it is, yeah. Well, There Will Be Blood was
Lincoln was his last one. 2013? His last one was Lincoln.
Yeah.
That was a good 5 years ago, so I think it's about time for him to resurface. That's his way.
Yeah.
We recently watched I'll have to check that one out again. We recently watched, speaking of Daniel Day-Lewis, who it's one of my wife's favorite movies, Last of the Mohicans. So we watched that with our family because I don't know if it's been so long, I couldn't remember I'd seen that film. My kids hadn't seen it yet. So we watched that one, and it's kind of fun to watch a movie with a little Native American backstory. And
filmed in North Carolina.
What was it?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
It filmed up in the Blue Ridge Parkway. Yep. Up in Western North Carolina.
Ah, okay. It's a good film. Daniel Day-Lewis always makes good movies. So, all right. Well, I guess that wraps things up here. So definitely want to thank our special guest, Michael Howie of The Fourth Wall, for joining us today and giving us his thoughts on the Blues Brothers. And so to wrap things up, again, we just want to thank you guys for sticking with us for this another episode of The Watchmen. For all of you guys who are watching on YouTube, we thank you so much. Please hit that like button, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you'll always be notified when a new video comes out. And for everybody listening on podcasts, thank you for staying with us. We appreciate your support, and we hope you'll listen next time. I'm Norb.
And I'm Mike.
And we are The Watchmen.
Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.
Thanks for watching The Watchmen.
Please click on here to watch other episodes, and be sure to hit that like button too.
And please subscribe and hit that notification bell. That way you'll always be alerted to any future episodes.
It really helps us out, and we appreciate it.
We'll see you next time. And remember, we'll be watching.